it comes down to kind of two things that like high performing brokers do to set themselves apart. And one is just like educating themselves on the industry. They become industry experts. They're subject matter experts in their field, right? Like they take it seriously. If they don't get training from a company, they go out and they find it on their own, right? They put in the work and they understand their industry, they understand their customers' industry, they understand what's important to their carriers, and they're just sponges for information, and it's a huge differentiator for them. Yeah. The other thing that comes up a lot is soft skills. And like it's probably not a huge surprise, but it's things like being open-minded, creative problem solving, taking initiative, time management. Like all of these things play a big role in a broker's success.
Welcome to the ThinkFreight Podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Werding, and it's my pleasure to have Nick Dangles. He's the co-founder of Sync Logistics Training. Nick, welcome to the ThinkFreight Podcast. Thanks for coming on today.
Hey, Thomas. No, man, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No, of course. I love the content you're always posting on LinkedIn. You're always posting really, really solid stuff, and I'm a big proponent of training and like upskilling yourself and making yourself the best version of yourself possible. So I'm really like in sync with what you guys are doing. I like the mission. So I'd love to talk a little bit more and kind of dive into your background, kind of how you got into the freight industry. I think you have a kind of interesting journey because you didn't initially start off in the freight industry. You kind of started down an interesting path. So why don't you dive into kind of your background, who you are, and kind of how you initially got into the freight industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, I think like a lot of people in the industry, I kind of fell into the industry. I live in Chicago right now, but like I just told you, I'm originally from Central Illinois. So like I grew up in Champaign. And then I moved up to Chicago for law school actually in like 2005. Long story short, like it wasn't a good fit for me. Just like, I didn't particularly enjoy it. And
did you finish law school?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Passed the bar, licensed attorney. Mm-hmm.
And then you got all the way through it and decided it wasn't not your cup of tea.
Yeah, in retrospect, I would do a few things differently there, but no, I passed the bar, licensed attorney, but I graduated in like 2008, and like the job market just tanked, so finding a job in and of itself was a challenge. Yeah, and it wasn't something I really enjoyed, so I just tried to transition to a career in sales, and I ran into a really fun situation where I was both underqualified and overqualified for all sales jobs, right? Like here absolutely. I am, like a 28-year-old guy with a law degree, and like no entry-level sales job's going to hire me, right? Because like they figure you're just going to bounce once an actual lawyer job pops up, and like no experienced sales jobs are hiring me because like I got no sales experience. So
right.
I ended up selling office supplies door to door for Quill for like 8 months. And then just like pure chance, a friend of mine introduced me to like Charlie Safro and Beth Herberholtz over there. And they hooked me up with my first job in freight at this company called Optimal Freight, where like I met a lot of cool people and I fell in love with the environment, Like I went from like my lawyer jobs where I was kind of sitting in my office churning out paperwork, not really talking to anybody. And then I get into this just like fast-paced, dynamic environment where everyone's screaming at each other. I'm like, dude, this is a job? Like, you're going to pay me to do this?
Did they have like drops on Friday and stuff like that?
Yeah, like it was a small place. So like we didn't have a lot of the like kind of frat atmosphere of the other like larger players, but
some of the other I won't get into some of them, but
yeah, but it was super fun. I met a lot of great people. I learned a ton, and I got hooked, and the rest is kind of history. I brokered freight for like 10 years, and then I got out of brokerage maybe 3-4 years ago. Started a small consulting company, and then more recently, like a year and a half ago, we started up Sync Logistics Training, and that's my background in a nutshell.
Man, that's an awesome that's an awesome story and awesome background. And shout out to Charlie, past guest on the show as well, to hooking you up and finding that good position for you and kind of hooking you into the freight industry, because we're definitely better with you in it than with you not in it, for sure, man. So I think it's a very interesting path. So what kind of law were you practicing when you first kind of got into your initial career?
Interesting question. So I spent most of my time in law, like practicing law. I represented condominium associations, and I basically just evicted people for unpaid assessments.
Okay, that's interesting, and I can kind of understand. I can kind of understand maybe why you didn't enjoy that in terms of being like in that kind of law. It doesn't sound like it's a very fun or very like like I don't know. It just doesn't sound as like maybe as interesting as other things. What kind of like took you? Was it just like that was kind of what was available because of the job market, or was that kind of like what? I guess it didn't interest you. So like, was it just kind of because of the job market at the time?
Yeah, I mean, in part it was job market. In part it was just because, like, just transparently, 22-year-old Nick didn't really think through some of his life decisions. Like, I majored in philosophy in college, and I had these grand plans of becoming, like, going into applied ethics and using a law degree to, like, get into medical ethics and stuff like that. And honestly, I didn't fully think it through. I didn't realize what the actual job entailed. And when I did realize, then it kind of occurred to me, like, oh, I can't see myself doing this for the next 30 years of my life.
Right.
So, I much prefer what I do now. Like, I make fun of lawyers a little bit in the job, but like, my wife's an attorney. I have like a bunch of friends who are attorneys, so she gets mad at me if I do. She's in cyber law, and it seems super interesting.
Oh, that sounds super interesting. We might have to have her on the show as well sometime.
I'm trying to get her. I'm telling her I can get her speaking engagements in freight.
Dude, she'd probably kill it. And honestly, like, cyber stuff right now is so important. So like, yeah, you should definitely hammer that home and definitely get her on some shows and stuff to talk about it, because that would be wild. So let me ask you this: Have you always, like, I know this is kind of a tough question, but like, have you always been entrepreneurial? Like, when you were like younger, 22-year-old Nick was going to law school and doing all these other things, did you ever think like maybe I would go out on my own and do my own thing, and like in the future with your law degree, or were you kind of just wanting to like go with a firm and do what you were saying with kind of like going into the medical side and going after kind of some of the ethics things?
You know, it's funny that you asked that. You're getting deeper in these questions than I thought you were going to. But I was talking to a friend of mine about that the other day, and like, the answer is no. You know, like, I was never a particularly entrepreneurial person. If you'd ask people who knew me 20, 30 years ago if they thought I'd be in sales in any capacity, like, their answer would be absolutely not. I don't tend to have I don't have that outgoing personality. But at the same time, like, I guess I've had a lot of events over the past 20 years of my life that have kind of like made me rethink the direction that I want to go, made me rethink like what's important to me in a job and in life in general. And I've kind of shifted my perspective a little bit. Like, one of those things was honestly selling office supplies door to door, you know, like, I'd never had a sales job before. And like, I'll never forget, like, I started selling and I was just like low to middle of the pack, right? Like, I'd never done it before. Absolutely. Like, I was kind of awkward going into these places. Like, I'm still super awkward about stuff. But then they send me out with this guy who was just killing it selling office supplies. And like, I was probably 8 years older than him at that point. I'm like, what's this dude doing that I'm not doing? Right? Like, how could he possibly be selling more office supplies than me? And I go out with him, and I'll never forget. Like, I had previously just been kind of waltzing from door to door, right? Taking my time, selling paper. This dude, like, from the get-go, outworks me for 10 hours that day. Right? Like, he's out of his car at 8 o'clock in the morning. He's like knocking on windows trying to get people's attention at their businesses. He's like going around back to try to find people. And when he can't, he's like immediately out to the next business. And I'm just like, holy shit. That's what I'm not doing, right? I'm not working hard enough. So like that really shifted my perspective on like what success looks like and what it takes to be successful in things like sales. So I kind of had a few, I don't know, episodes of just getting kicked in the face that like shifted my perspective on like what I need to do and what I want to do and what I enjoy in life. So no, I have not always been entrepreneurial, but I've found that it's something that I really enjoy, you know?
No, absolutely. I think that's a great like way to put it, and like great way of kind of finding that journey. Like you said, like you've had a lot of things that led up to, in your 20 years, have led up to you like going down your own path and kind of redefining what success looks like to you and how you view that. So I think that that's a really, really good and valuable point. And I think that, like, I'll be honest, I had a very similar like path when I first got into sales, selling cars. I was like the first 3 or 4 months, I was very middle of the pack. I had never sold anything before. And I remember like sitting down with my manager and being like, okay, like what the hell am I not doing that like the top salesperson is doing? His name is Tony. And I remember being like, Tony can barely write his own name. And this is genuine. Like he's not stupid in terms of like people or anything like that. He's very people smart, but he wasn't school smart. He didn't have, like, I could barely understand a text message from him, but he would genuinely have people going on test drives, and he would be like, hey, stop at McDonald's and pick me up a Coke. And they would genuinely pick him up food from McDonald's. Like, he was so personable and so just like genuine with the people that like they loved him. And I was like, wow, like I went on like 5 or 6 like ride-alongs with him and a lot of stuff with like shadowing him. And I just kind of learned like not to be as serious and just be very human with people. And when I got into that just really human element and kind of like being like, I'm going to be very human, but also like like you said, like outwork everyone else. Those are the two things that like he really put into it. Like he was out there, like no one could ever find him because he was always like out talking to someone. He was in the service lane trying to like find new business. So he was always working to find new business, whether he was out like at dinner and things like that. I mean, he would come in on a Saturday morning and selling the waitress that him and his wife had dinner with a car at Saturday morning, because he was just personable and she had said, oh, I'm looking for a car. So the next morning, 8:30 in the morning, she's in there buying a car. So it comes down to outwork, like you said, outworking people and also just kind of having that human element.
Yeah. And I think like being open-minded has been a big part of like my personal growth, I guess. You know, that like what you mentioned about like being personable and like the human element, like that's something that I've like traditionally struggled with, you know?
Yeah.
Like I'm not like a naturally like personable, outgoing person. Like my wife makes fun of me for being a robot sometimes. And like I'll never forget at my first brokerage job. Like I mentioned Ryan Schreiber earlier, right?
Yeah.
And he was like my manager at my first brokerage. I ended up managing a bunch of his accounts, and he was kind of walking me through the process of what that looks like. And I was just always very businesslike, right? Like I would call my customers like I was supposed to every day, like hit them up for business. And he was listening. He's like, Nick, like you're literally not talking to them about anything but business. Like that's your entire phone call. I'm like, like what else would I talk to them about? So he kind of gave me a project where every day, like I had to call my customers and learn 3 new things about each one of them that had nothing to do with business. And like it really put me outside of my comfort zone, but it taught me a great lesson in terms of like how to build those relationships, you know?
No,
I feel like I'm going off on a tangent here, but like,
I think that's a very good point as well. And I think we definitely are off on a different tangent, but I like it because it's very valid. Like when I was also in broker, as a broker, I would actively try to like when I would talk to my customers and they would say like, oh, like I'm going to my grandson's birthday this weekend or whatever, I would put that in my notes. So that way on Monday morning or Tuesday when I talk to them again, how was your grandson's birthday? Because then it reminds you to stay human. It also says, oh, this person actually gives a shit about me. They don't just want my freight, and it's not just a transactional thing. They actually want to know like, and like they're more invested in the human side. And I think that that's where you can also really take a massive win and win a lot of freight that way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I have a terrible memory, which anyone who's worked with me will vouch for. So I'm like I'm heavily dependent on CRMs and stuff like that.
Yep.
So like a creep, I keep track of all this information about my customers just so I can have it as a reference. Like, oh, so and so has 2 kids. These are their birthdays.
Yep. No, exactly. And it's, you feel kind of creepy and stalkery, but you're also like, it's kind of like, I can't live in my brain. I will forget the second they say it. Yeah. I will not remember it if I don't write it down. So no, I completely get that. So let's dive into training a little bit, because you have an interesting way of putting training and how you guys do like training as a service, which I think is really interesting, kind of taking the SaaS model and turning into training. So kind of where did that come from, and kind of how did you, I guess, come up with kind of what you guys are doing as far as what Sync Logistics training is today?
Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned the like training as a service element of it. We're trying to switch away from that particular branding because like we realize no one understands what it is.
Right.
But like the impetus behind like why we wanted to create Sync is just that like brokers tend to be terrible at training. 100%. Like I'm totally generalizing. There are some brokers out there who have amazing training programs. Yeah. Like there are plenty of them out there that do a great job. But on the flip side, there are also others who are just abysmal at it. And I say that from like my own experience being trained, my experience as a manager trying to train people, and like from talking to folks across the industry. We see training typically fall into like 3 buckets. Bucket 1 is like, hey man, here's a load board and a phone. Good luck. Let's see what happens. Yeah. Bucket 2 is kind of a 2 or 3 week long training course where they try to teach you everything you could possibly need to know about freight in 2 weeks. But like the reality is no one's going to remember that stuff. And then bucket 3 is just like shadowing, right? You spend 2 weeks kind of shadowing different people in the organization. And then after this 2-3 weeks, like you're just kind of done. And like, here you go, you're on your own. So like we wanted to build out Sync really to help out with that process, to help people train their employees more effectively.
I think that's really interesting. So I told you before we started, I started at TQL, and I think that they have a pretty good training in terms of how they kind of get your feet acclimated without kind of just like throwing you into the fire. So, real quick for people who don't know what, TQL's training is, you kind of start day one in a training room, and you just kind of do some basic training. It's an overall 6-month training, but the first really 2 weeks or 3 weeks is very heavy on half actual training and being like in a training room with a trainer or on a computer learning about logistics and kind of safety and kind of those kind of things, as well as like what load boards are and all the terminology. And then the other half of the day is you're training with, or you're shadowing with the broker whose account you're going to be working on. And it's a pretty interesting process. Like after the first week, you're kind of on the floor a good chunk of your day, like at the end of the week, and it kind of restarts where Monday you're doing a lot of heavy training. By Friday, you're kind of more on the floor. And by the end of that second week, or even kind of going into your second week, they kind of expect you to do a little bit of like, hey, you're going to be shadowing, doing check calls and listening in and actually like, hey, maybe like if you're getting comfortable, maybe do a couple check calls, kind of get your feet wet. And you're not going to do anything crazy. Like you're not going to take any inbound calls. You're not going to be answering customer calls or anything like that. But you may do a couple check calls, put in the notes. And honestly, for 6 months, you really get a really good taste of the business. And like for myself, I had a really great broker who took really good ownership of training and teaching. And also shout out to Chris, and also, he let me take a lot of ownership in his accounts. And it wasn't just me kind of being his assistant. It was really me learning how to be a broker. He really, I would answer customer calls for him. He would be like, hey, I'm on this line, grab this customer call. And they knew me. They knew like if he wasn't available, they could reach out to me. And so it was a very interesting like way of how they went about it. And I definitely, I was there for almost 2 years. I won't say anything bad about TQL. A lot of people, there's a lot of good, a lot of bad with any brokerage. But I learned a lot, had a great upbringing. So I definitely think that like you're spot on with like, there's a lot of opportunity with brokerages to train more and to really like not just throw you into the fire. And that's kind of what we see in a lot of these bad operations that we hear about a lot of times that, people make fun of online. And I do it too. We all, make memes about these bad operations who just, don't have a lot of skill or a lot of knowledge of the brokers, or of the overall, logistics field. So where maybe should people start in terms of if they're wanting to like do more training or if they're wanting to like implement something different than what they're doing now? Where should they start? How can they start, building out some of these processes?
Well, shameless plug, right? The easiest way to start is like having content, and I happen to know a company that can help with that, right?
Ooh,
but
what's the name of that company?
It might be Sync Logistics Training. Feel free to reach out if you're watching this. Yeah, but that's the biggest thing I tell people: like have content, and have somebody who actually owns the process. Those are the two biggest things. If you don't have any standardized content and you're literally just putting people on the floor and having them shadow and just kind of like you're getting what I call the broker telephone game, where like rep number 1 who was first hired trains rep number 2, then rep number 2 trains rep number 3, then rep number 3 trains rep number 4, and by the time you get down to rep number 3, they have no idea what they're doing, right? Yeah. Even if that first person,
it's just a blind leading the blind. Yeah.
It is. So if you don't have any standardized way of doing it, if you don't have any consistent content that people go through, then you have no idea like what people are even learning, like much less if what they're learning matches what you want them to be doing. So just to have that consistency and to have some sort of like formalized process, just like have content and then have someone own the process. Again, it's very similar because like if no one's really responsible for training people, the training is not going to be done. It's like I'm going to sell against myself a little bit here and tell you that this is what we see with like adoption with Sync too. If no one's owning that process of actually training people, like no one's going to do it. Like if you just give people training content and say, here you go, do some employee training. Not one person in the history of employee training has like gone out of their way to do it just because. Like someone needs to actually own that process and oversee the training.
Yeah,
those are the two big things I've mentioned to people.
Yeah, no, I think those are great. Like I come from, like I said, TQL. I've been at startup brokerages. I've been at.
It's funny you mentioned TQL. Like I consistently hear good things about TQL's training. As much flack as they get in the industry, I've never heard anything bad about their training.
They really set you up for really good, genuinely good success. If you want to be a good broker, you can apply what they give you and genuinely become a very talented broker. There's a lot of really good brokers there that stay there for a long time, and also good brokers that leave and go on to do great things. But yeah, their training is genuinely top notch, and it's a lot of things, but it's just matching. I think. Matching people or matching junior brokers with or training brokers with really good brokers who actually want to better the industry. There's a lot of brokers that just don't care about the industry, whether they're $1 million brokers or not. They're kind of just in it for their own pocket, and they're going to go about things the wrong way. There was plenty of them in my office in Chicago. I know that for a fact. I heard it on the phones every day of complaining about $100 tonnage charge or $100 in detention that are valid reasons. So it's just like you hear that every day, but like you said, their training is definitely top notch. Let me ask you this. So what are you guys at Sync doing? So if I was 123 brokerage, like if I needed some training, if I'm hiring my second or third employee or my 100th employee, and we're kind of realizing, hey, we need to really focus more on training and upskilling our employees. What are you guys doing? How can you guys help in that process?
Yeah. So from a very just high level overview, what we've done is we've built out an LMS, like a learning management system, within which we're housing a ton of brokerage content, right? And we've broken it down into your major brokerage competencies, if you will, right? So you've got industry knowledge content, like this is what a truck is, this is how hours of service work. You've got things like tracking content, like how do you track a load from point A to point B in different statuses, carrier sales, customer sales, pricing, account management, like compliance and legal. And like our long-term goal is for Sync to be something that someone can live in from day one at their brokerage through their entire tenure at that company. And we'll consistently be adding content so you can always have something to learn, be it for new hires, more advanced role specific content for more experienced folks, or then even getting into like management and like personal and professional development, right? Like that's our long-term goal for it. Admittedly, we're still new, like we're still very MVP. Like, do we have necessarily all of that management and soft skills content built out yet? No, but like we're getting there. And the goal is to really like lessen what we call the management burden of training. You know, no matter what company you're at, time tends to be the biggest blocker for brokers in getting training done.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's what we hear all the time. I just don't have enough time to train people, or like I need bodies on the floor, or like so-and-so needs to be making phone calls. They don't have time to do this training. So like we want to help lessen that burden for companies. That way the employees can actually still get the training that they need, and it's not as much of a burden on management.
Now, with your LMS, I'm guessing this is more of a like at your own speed, but like the brokerages probably have like hard deadlines of, hey, you need to have this done by Q1, or have quarterly trainings where, hey, like you have to. I remember when I was in auto sales, like we had GM training that we had to have done at every single quarter. Otherwise, like we got personally penalized because the dealership got penalized. So is that kind of like the overall structure, like you kind of have like a quarterly training, and then the brokerage kind of has to enforce those standards and kind of make sure people are doing their LMS training?
Yeah. So if we give individual companies the ability to build out their own learning paths for folks, right?
Oh, that's cool.
Because like we've come to find out, like we pivoted a little bit on this, but we've come to find out that not every broker agrees with our training methodology, or like not every broker wants to train their employees the same way. So what we do is we give people the ability to kind of plug and play, right? So if you're a broker who kind of agrees with our training methodology, where you want to do a bunch of cross training and you want training to actually like trickle in over time, great. Like you have the ability to do that and build out custom learning paths for folks. If you want to cram all of your training into 1 week, I don't necessarily agree with that, but if that's what you want to do, you are capable of doing it.
Now, you mentioned a little bit of your kind of what your methodology is. What kind of methodology do you guys overall go with what you guys are kind of training with or training on?
You know, it's similar to what you mentioned earlier, actually. It's a longer process, right? And it involves like a big part of it involves cross training, you know, because like our thought is that it helps you develop, I guess I would say, like a level of professional empathy. Right?
100%.
That way, like you don't run, or you at least lessen those scenarios where like you're a carrier sales rep and you get all pissed at customer sales because your appointments aren't scheduled exactly right. Well, like maybe if you spent some time like messing around in Retalix or something, you'd realize that appointment scheduling is not that easy. And then similarly on the customer sales side, right? Like if you're getting angry at carrier sales because they can't cover your load, well, like if you tried to cover freight before, maybe you'd understand that the reason they're struggling is because it's like a middle of nowhere to middle of nowhere load of scrap metal with no margin in it, right? Like that's like it very rarely is it just because carrier sales is lazy and isn't working on your freight.
Absolutely.
So yeah, like the way we suggest people structure it involves like cross training in different roles. It gives you that professional empathy. It gives you a more well-rounded understanding of the industry, and like. Once you get into your actual job after you do the cross training, you're just a more well-rounded employee. But again, you don't have to do it that way if you don't want to.
No, and I think that's a great way of going about it and great methodology. I had the same thing at TQL. I mean, I had to, like, during my training, three or 4 months in, I had to spend like I think it was 2 or 3 weeks. I was doing like from 5, like we stopped at, like we could leave at 4 o'clock or I think it was 4 or 5 o'clock. I don't remember. But you know, we could, oh, if it was 4 o'clock, and we could, at 5 o'clock, we had to start after hours. So there was times where, like, for 3 weeks, you're doing after hours immediately after work because they want you to understand that process as to, like, why that after hours person is reaching out to you, and also what they do and why they're so important in the process. Just like you said, it's developing that professional empathy. It's you understand what they're going through and why they're ending up reaching out to you. It's probably the last resort as to why they're reaching out to you. And that's kind of what I learned is when I was doing that, my first couple months, I was like, why are they always like reaching out to Chris or to whoever it is at nighttime to find things out? It's like, you know, why can't they just take care of it? It's also because, you know, at the end, I'm the owner of the load. It's my money that people are dealing with. So at the end of the day, they also want to make sure that like they're making the best decision for the account, for the customer, and for everyone at play. So, you know, it just comes down to having, like you said, that professional empathy, but also just kind of understanding why things are going the way they are and having that real understanding as a whole to the logistics and into the overall like field that you're in.
Yeah. And another reason why like we stretch out the training process is just it can be hard to understand content when you don't have context for it. You know, Absolutely. And this is the context and relevance. And this is something like a pitfall that a lot of brokers fall into when they cram too much training into 1 or 2 weeks. You know, you'll be at a full truckload broker and they'll be teaching you about how ZAR lights impact LTL pricing in week 1. And it's like, why? You know, like right. They're never going to need to know that. Like, why don't you take that training and trickle it in later on when it becomes more relevant? But they don't. Absolutely. Like, they don't have the mechanisms to be able to do that, so it all ends up in week 1. And like to like go further along this point is the context, right? Like, if you teach somebody everything that they could theoretically need to know about carrier sales in week 1, well, like they've never even talked to a driver or booked a truck yet. Like, they're not right. They're not going to understand what you mean by internally marketing carriers. They're going to completely gloss over it. So that's stuff that is better introduced to people when they're a little bit further along in their careers. Yeah,
no, absolutely. You know, you're in your first week, you're kind of learning what the hell it is you're even doing, and what a truck driver does, and what for hire capacity is, and like what a DOT number is, and what an MC number is, and like how many pallets can fit on a truck, and like weight limits, and you're learning a lot of just the very basics. And I think sometimes when managers or higher level brokerage people are putting together, executives are putting together some of this training, it's kind of from a place of, well, I do this every day, so they need to know this right off the bat. But they also just have to look at it from the perspective of a lot of these people have no idea what anything in this industry is. They don't even know what the hell LTL is. So, you know, trying to teach them that in their first week is, like you said, they're not going to have any context, and it's not going to really stick in their brain at all, because they're not going to use it for 3, 6, maybe 9 months, maybe even a year.
Yeah, and like adding that structure and trickling in that content kind of counterintuitively really does help you decrease ramp times too. Because say you're going into a tracking role, you know, what do you actually need to know to be able to track a driver? Like, well, you probably need to know what a shipper is, what a driver is, what a consignee is, and a couple of other things, but like not that much other stuff. You know, right. It's not like you don't need that much information. So rather than spending that entire week of cramming them full of stuff they don't need to know, take a couple of days, tell them what they actually do need to know, and get them on the phone more quickly. And then from there, gradually build up additional content.
Yep, I completely agree. I think that's a really great strategy and a really great kind of methodology to go about it. And like you said, you kind of give everyone the building blocks to kind of build out their own training, but obviously, you know, your methodology and kind of that longer term approach is obviously kind of what you guys preach and kind of what you guys kind of push. So let me ask you, so I kind of want to switch a little bit to kind of why do you think, or where do you think maybe this buzzword that we've heard so much about for the last year, AI, maybe where can AI potentially fit into training for brokerages? Have you guys thought of any of that at the current?
Actually, yes. So we have a partnership with this company called SimTrain. I don't know if you're familiar with them at all,
I'm
but
not.
they actually they use artificial intelligence and machine learning to help facilitate these simulated calls, and they're super cool. So through our platform, you can actually go through and rather than doing mock calls, which take up a ton of time for everybody, you can do these simulations through our platform where you can practice talking to like a simulated driver or a simulated customer for like getting past gatekeepers and overcoming objections and stuff like that. So like
That's
short
cool.
answer to your question, yes, I think there's a ton of opportunity to use artificial intelligence in training, and something that we're already doing is using it for things like simulated calls.
Now, are those simulated calls, and you may not know because it's obviously not your company, but you guys do have a partnership with them. Are those like based on actual calls from like actual shippers and actual drivers and things like that? Is that how that like AI is learned?
Yeah, so the way we have it structured is like we've actually built out the simulations. So like
Okay,
the folks over at Sync Logistics have built out these simulations, so like
that's
our
cool.
customers don't need to do that. So like they're not like a Chat GPT generated conversation. Like, you can do
Right.
that, but like these are all like, clearly built out by human beings and very relevant to what
Cool.
you'll be doing. The AI comes into play more so in our use case with like grading of the simulations.
Okay.
So like they use natural language processing to go in and like pick up whether or not you said certain keywords and then to grade your sims
Got it.
accordingly.
I think that's really interesting. I was on a call yesterday, a podcast yesterday with talking with his name is Tilo from Levity AI, and we were talking about kind of some of the potential use cases for training or for AI and training, and we had kind of talked about kind of using basically exactly this is a training with it, like an AI for role playing with like shippers and carriers and gatekeepers to be able to, instead of doing it on a live call or use like I remember TQL was we didn't do a lot of role playing, which I thought was very interesting. It was a lot of just hop on the phone and do it. And I think, I mean, to a certain aspect, yes, that's great. But like, I think instead of trying to call, shippers or trying to get customers, you may want to do like different kind of training before you're just kind of spraying and praying and hoping, you can mess up live. I don't like messing up live. I think if you could do something like this where you can use AI with SimTrain and really be able to hone in on your craft, especially if you're new to sales, to be able to hone your craft and really be able to learn with that AI.
Yeah, no, we're super excited about them. They're going to become an increasingly important part of our training because it's just there's a lot of advantages, right? One, it breaks up the training itself, right? So you're not just sitting there staring at video content all day. Like we're trying to incorporate different learning modalities, so you can go from like a video based training and then apply what you learn in these simulations to keep you a little bit more engaged. But also it gives you, kind of like what you mentioned, it gives you a way to practice these phone calls in a nice low risk environment before jumping into live calls.
Yeah.
Like if you think about your first time calling a driver, it's kind of scary, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
you don't know what this guy's going to say. You don't know what crazy things are happening on the other side of the phone. So if you can go through and practice these scenarios before jumping into prep to like tracking a driver or selling a load, or like on the customer side, getting past gatekeepers, overcoming objections, it just gives you that much more of a comfort level when you actually do get into your live calls.
Absolutely. You have a little bit more confidence. Like you don't feel as like new to it. You don't feel like you just feel a lot better about yourself and a lot better about like how to overcome some of these objections, and you're not so worried that like the driver is going to be super rude. I mean, most of the time you're not going to have that. Most drivers are really, really nice, really chill. They're not going to blow you up because you're calling and asking for a quick update, especially if you're brand new and you're like, "Hey, I'm Tommy from TQL and I'm kind of new, so like, ha ha ha." Like I remember my first calls, they were terrible. Like I fully remember that. Trauma to this day. Like they were bad. They were terrible, and I had experience in sales, but it was like such a new environment. And I had like listened to like the other person who was leaving the account. Like they had some interesting drivers on the accounts, and they would like go into a lot of like specific details of like just their lives and things like that. And they had like a lot of good relationships, but I was not prepared for like, hey, I need an update on what load 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's like, I'm on the phone for 16 minutes learning all about this guy's evening, just trying to get a load update. So it was very interesting, and just trying to kind of learn the different key aspects of kind of, that side of it too.
Yeah. And some of it's just exposing yourself to different scenarios and different ways to resolve problems, right? Because so much of brokerage is like creative problem solving and troubleshooting.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, I've got this demo of a simulation that I do where I had an old carrier rep of mine voice the driver, and it's hilarious. It's not his first rodeo pretending to be a driver, but what this particular one illustrates is like what to do if a driver calls in and says his pickup number isn't working. You know, like driver calls in, hey man, pickup number's not working. I'm at the shipper. Like, I'm going to leave if you don't get this figured out. Right. And like, if you've never experienced that before, your immediate reaction is like, oh shit. Like, I got to figure out what's going on with this pickup number. Like I got to call the customer or get a new pickup number, figure out what's going on. But like, if you've had some experience, you know, the first thing you do is, hey man, what address are you at? Right. Like, are you at the right place?
Yep.
Next question. Tell me what pickup number you're actually using.
Yep.
You ask those two questions, resolves 95% of problems on the shipper end, I would imagine. Right? Like,
Absolutely.
Do you disagree? If you've done this for a while, like those two questions knock out most problems. But like, if you've never experienced that before, like, you don't have the wherewithal to ask those questions.
No, 100%. You're just immediately panicked that like everything's about to blow up and it's 3:55 and I'm not going to be able to leave at 4:15.
Yeah. Yeah. So this
is ruining the night. This is ruining my night, and now I'm panicked, and I've been here for 4 days, and they expect me to know what's going on with the pickup number. No, and you're 100% right. Like, you have to know, and those two questions can resolve 90 to 95% of those issues, because a lot of times the driver is at the wrong spot, or someone, or the dispatcher or someone else has given him the wrong pickup number, or he's transposed the pickup number. I've had plenty of times where I've given the drivers pickup numbers, and they've been trying to use like the first come, first serve times, thinking that was the pickup number. They're like, FSCS 0712 is the pickup number. They're like, that's not our pickup number. And he reads it back to me. I'm like, no, buddy. You're looking at the wrong section. It's my apologies. It's to the left or to the right or wherever it is. And it's just like, a lot of times you just have to know, like, sometimes there's just mistakes. Like, drivers can be tired too, and they can make silly mistakes just like we can. So a lot of times you can just solve a lot of those issues with answering some pretty simple questions.
Yeah. And some of it's just about like also practicing, I guess, what I would call conversational best practices, right? Yeah. A big one we talk about and have simulations built out on is like avoiding leading questions. You know, like if you talk to a driver, same pickup number scenario, right? Like, hey man, you're using pickup number 1, 2, 3, 4, right? He's going to say yes. Right? Of course he's going to say yes. Yeah. Whereas if you ask him, hey, what pickup number are you using? He'll tell you, oh, I'm using like 1356B, you know? And it's just simple tweaks like that to actually get the answers that you want rather than rather than getting incorrect information.
No, absolutely. I completely agree. Nick, we're already over time. I don't want to keep you for too long. No. But I got two more quick questions for you. So what are some of the most, like, I guess, important skills for freight brokers to work on, especially, you know, in this kind of down market we're in right now? What can they work on now to really kind of help them now, but also in the future?
Ooh, great question. If anyone listening to this is going to TIA, the conference in April, I have an entire learning lab that I'm doing on this question. It's about developing tomorrow's high performers today or something like that. But in my opinion, and spoiler alert for the learning lab, the opinions of people that I interviewed about this question, it comes down to kind of two things that like high performing brokers do to set themselves apart. And one is just like educating themselves on the industry. You know, they become industry experts. They're subject matter experts in their field, right? Like, they take it seriously. If they don't get training from their company, they go out and they find it on their own, right? They put in the work and they understand their industry, they understand their customers' industry, they understand what's important to their carriers, and they're just sponges for information, and it's a huge differentiator for them.
Yeah.
The other thing that comes up a lot is soft skills. And like, it's probably not a huge surprise, but it's things like being open-minded, creative problem solving, taking initiative, time management. Like, all of these things play a big role in a broker's success.
I think you're spot on. I think, especially with soft skills, that's not as talked about, I feel like, as much. Everyone always knows, like, hey, you need to learn and do education, and people may not know, like, what do you mean by learning an education, Nick? Like, if someone's saying being a subject matter expert or being an industry expert, how can you kind of learn, and how can you, I guess, become a subject matter expert?
So how can you become a subject matter expert? That's another really good question. I'm going to answer it in two ways. One is kind of taking the initiative and going out on your own and doing things like searching for information, right? Keeping up with like industry trends by reading different periodicals and keeping up in the news and stuff like that. By going out and like just researching things about the industry. If you have new opportunities in areas that you're not particularly familiar with, like a lot of brokers just like reaction to that is, man, I don't know how to do trade. Better not quote this. But like, if the high performing people out there go out and learn about trades, or they go out and learn about trader pools. And it's kind of as simple as that. The other thing that I'll mention is something that I found to be important is like high performing brokers surround themselves with environments that help them learn, and it's like, there are certainly like your top 1%ers out there who environment doesn't matter. Like, they're just going to fucking figure it out no matter what. But for most of us, environment's important. Like, you need to be around mentors who are actually there to give you information. You need to be around people that you can kind of turn to and like ask questions, and other subject matter experts. It's just, for companies, I think creating this culture of learning where you actually foster the learning and development of employees is hugely important for developing high performing reps.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that that's really something that needs to be more like implemented and looked at. And if you're listening and you want to, like, actually develop your book and develop your skills more, you're not always going to have that training, development through your brokerage. So you kind of have to go out on your own and kind of, learn and develop those skills yourself. We live in the internet age. There's always an answer kind of right at your fingertips. And, whether you're connected into different communities or not, there's a lot of different freight communities that are forming, whether that's on LinkedIn or FreightX or, different communities on Discord as well. Reed's community is great. There's a lot of great communities that you can join and just kind of learn and become a subject matter expert that way as well. Kind of like you said, just kind of looking at different, things that are going on in the industry, keeping up with trends, keeping up with different periodicals, whether that's, newsletters like myself or Freight Caviar. Paul does a great job, but there's a lot of really great industry news, and whether that's going straight to the source with Freight Waves and Transport News, and some of those really great full service outlets. There's a lot of ways to really take advantage of training yourself and learning more about the industry and keeping up with what's going on. So I definitely think that it's a great opportunity, and people, if you're really wanting to, learn more about the industry and take advantage of, the opportunities in freight, definitely need to, upskill yourself and learn, kind of take that upon yourself, to learn more about the education, and also surrounding yourself, like you said, with those people that, can help you upskill yourself, and having those good mentors, is definitely key.
Yeah. And like, that's kind of a word of warning that I give to employers a lot of the time, right?
Yeah.
Because those people with potential to be high performing brokers, I mean, they want that. They want to be surrounded with other people who are like in the same boat. They want to learn. They're like educating other people. And like, if they're not finding that at your brokerage, they're going to go somewhere else where they can find it.
Absolutely. Last thing I've got for you, Nick. What are you most bullish on for the rest of 2024 in the freight and logistics space?
What am I most bullish on? I'm going to steal something from my friend Ryan, who I mentioned earlier, that he wrote an article a while back, and he called like 2024 the year of like AI preparedness or something like that. And I'm going to reluctantly agree with him. I usually like to disagree with him, but like I think that's a great point that he makes. That like, is AI going to be jumping in like a month from now and changing everything? Like, no, probably not, right? But I mean, a lot of companies just don't have the data or the ability to use AI right now. But
Absolutely.
like successful companies now are the ones that are actually like streamlining their processes, getting themselves access to data that they need to be able to use AI more effectively. That way they're going to be more prepared when it becomes more and more prevalent in the industry.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think that, I've talked to a lot of AI companies over the last couple of weeks, and that kind of seems to be what they're hearing as well, is a lot of companies are just kind of getting prepared and starting to build out kind of all the data they need and getting their hands on some of the things that they need and starting to build out some of the processes and tech and kind of implementing some of these things like ChatGPT and Gemini into some of their workflows to better help some of their reps, and they're teaching them how to use them more effectively. And I think that we're just going to continue to see kind of that development of AI and that preparedness of it, whether that be, on the actual brokerage side or brokerage employees themselves, just kind of taking it upon themselves to learn some of these AI tools to kind of stay ahead and not fall behind. I definitely completely agree with you there, Nick. Nick, I just want to, thank you again for coming on the show. This was a really fun episode, and I really enjoyed talking about, training and practice and things like that, because it's definitely very key to success, whether you want to, have a massive book of business or you want to go out on your own and do something in the industry, whether that's, building a tech company or whatever. You have to upskill yourself and train and learn new things. So I appreciate you coming on the show, talking about something I'm also passionate about. And where can people, if they want to find you or they want to learn more about Think Logistics training, where can they find you guys online?
Yeah. So first of all, really appreciate you having me on. This was a long time in the works. We've rescheduled like 3 times, but I really enjoyed it today.
We've had so many problems getting this one going.
Yeah, but we finally did it. But no, like if anyone wants to reach out to me, I am like overly active on LinkedIn. So feel free to shoot me a message on LinkedIn. I typically respond to those. Or also feel free to shoot me an email. My email is just nick@synclogisticstraining.com.
Awesome. We'll have links to Nick and Think Logistics Training in any of our show notes or on YouTube. If you guys like today's podcast, make sure you guys give it a like and review. Helps us out a ton. And don't forget, we do drop newsletters 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, thinkfreight.io. And we'll catch you guys in the next episode. And don't forget to think freight.